The morning air at Kennedy Space Center shimmered with heat and tension. Thousands of faces, a sea of humanity, were turned upward, all watching the white giant on the launch pad. Apollo 11. It stood there like a promise, a cathedral of metal and dreams, pointing to the heavens. Inside its tiny capsule, three men sat strapped into their seats. Neil Armstrong, the commander, was a picture of calm focus. Buzz Aldrin, the lunar module pilot, was murmuring quick final checks into his microphone. And Michael Collins, the command module pilot, sat silent, his eyes fixed on the control panel, on the instruments that held their lives in its hands, the countdown, a voice of destiny. Thundered through the speakers across the Cape, T-minus 10, 9 or 8, a collective. Hush fell over the crowd. Every breath was held in suspension. Children clung tightly to their parents' hands. Scientists, soldiers, journalists, hippies, families from every walk of life for this one moment. They all shared the same heartbeat, the same electrifying anticipation. 3 or 2, 1. Ignition. A deep, bone-shaking rumble shook the very earth. A volcano of fire and smoke erupted beneath the rocket. Then, slowly, almost impossibly, the Saturn V began to rise. It clawed its way into the sky, carrying not just 3 men, but the hopes, fears, and dreams of all humankind. The crowd erupted. People shouted, they cried, they prayed. The rocket ascended, a brilliant spear of light against the bright Florida sky, shrinking into a blazing star until, finally, it was gone. For a long, silent moment, no one spoke. They had just witnessed history take flight. Miles away, in the cool, controlled chaos of Houston Mission Control, hundreds of engineers sat hunched before glowing screens. Their faces, tense and illuminated by blinking lights, were a mosaic of concentration. Cigarette smoke curled like anxious ghosts through the air. Every beep, every crackle, every voice that came through their headsets felt sacred. "We'll go for staging," a calm voice announced. "Roger that," came the immediate reply. Up in the capsule, hurtling away from Earth at unimaginable speed, Armstrong's voice came through, steady and calm, even as his heart hammered against his ribs. The journey had begun. 3 days later, the spacecraft slipped silently into lunar orbit. The moon, a silent, cold, and magnificent sphere, filled their windows. It wasn't the friendly face from nursery rhymes. It was a stark, alien world of gray and black. Michael Collins, their chariot driver to the stars, stayed behind in the command module, Columbia. He was destined to orbit alone while his crewmates descended to the surface. His voice crackled over the radio, a final farewell before the separation. "See you on the other side," and then static silence. In that moment, he became the most isolated human being in history, a solitary atom orbiting a new world. Yet looking down at the lunar surface below, he whispered to himself, "Good luck, boys." Inside the lunar module, the Eagle, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin began their perilous descent. Suddenly, alarms blared through the tiny cabin. The guidance computer was overloaded. The radar flickered. Fuel was running dangerously low. Buzz's voice came through to Houston, rapid and tense, a stream of numbers that spelled out their dwindling chances. Altitude 500 feet. 30 seconds of fuel. Through the small, triangular window, Armstrong saw their designated landing site was a minefield of rocks and craters. A split-second decision. He took manual control. His hand was steady, his breath tight, his mind a razor-sharp instrument. The world below silent, gray, and waiting rushed up to meet them. 20 feet of 10. Then a soft thud. A gentle jolt. The contact light glowed on the panel. A pause, thick with unspoken relief. Then Armstrong's voice, calm as a whisper but trembling with the weight of history, crackled across 240,000 miles of space. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Mission Control exploded. The years of tireless work, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, it all erupted in a single, joyous roar. Men in crew cuts and horn-rimmed glasses hugged, wept, and slapped each other on the back. But inside the lunar module, the 2 astronauts sat in a profound silence, staring out at the strange, beautiful desolation beyond their window. They had done it. They were on the moon. When Armstrong began his descent down the ladder, every heartbeat on Earth seemed to pause with him. He reached the final rung and looked down at the powdery gray dust below. Billions of years had passed, and no living thing had ever disturbed this ancient surface. He hesitated for just a breath, a man on the precipice of eternity. Then he stepped down. "That's one small step for man," he said, his voice carrying across the cosmos one giant leap for mankind, and with that single step, the world changed forever. Children in villages without electricity huddled around crackling transistor radios. Soldiers on opposite sides of brutal wars paused their fighting to watch blurry television screens. In Africa, Asia, America, and beyond every I turned to the same pale moon, our moon. For the first time in human history, the entire world was united, sharing a single, breathtaking moment of awe. Buzz Aldrin joined him soon after, moving with a careful, bouncing grace in the low gravity. Together, they planted the American flag into the soft lunar soil. It stood there, not as a symbol of conquest, but as a messenger carrying a plaque that read, "We came in peace for all mankind." They looked up and saw home Earth. A stunning, fragile blue marble hanging in the infinite blackness. It looked so small, so vulnerable, so beautiful. Buzz whispered, his voice filled with a reverence that spanned the void. "It looks so peaceful from here." Neil nodded slowly, his helmet hiding his expression but not the feeling in his voice. "Maybe one day it will be." On July 24th, 1969, Apollo 11 splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, a fiery phoenix returning to its nest. Waves crashed against the capsule as helicopters hovered above. When the astronauts were finally pulled aboard the recovery ship, they emerged exhausted, pale, and beaming with triumphant smiles. Neil looked around at the cheering crowd of sailors and scientists. He barely heard the applause. All he could think was, "We made it back." He whispered softly to himself, so quietly no one else could hear, "We actually did it." But he knew the truth. This wasn't just a victory. It belonged to the thousands of scientists who had worked sleepless nights, to the engineers who believed in impossible mathematics, to the seamstresses who hand-stitched the spacesuits, and to every single human who had ever dared to look up at the night sky and dream of touching the stars. For one brief, shining moment, humanity had looked beyond its wars and its borders and reached for something greater. Decades later, a little girl sits in her grandfather's lap on a clear night. She points her small telescope at the bright, cratered face of the moon. "Grandpa," she asks, "did people really walk up there?" He smiles, his eyes shining with a distant memory. "Yes, sweetheart. Once upon a time, we dared to look up, and we didn't stop until we got there." The girl gazes at the moon, silent and glowing, unaware of the immense courage and collective will it took to make that moment possible. And somewhere up there in the dark sea of space, the footprints of two men still rest, undisturbed, a timeless reminder of what humanity can achieve when it dreams together. On that day, humanity didn't just reach the moon. We reached for the very best version of ourselves. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey back in time. If you were as inspired by this story as I am, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more stories about our greatest achievements. Until next time, keep looking up.